Number 16 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, Sub 3, the committee is meeting on its study of foreign elections interference. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are all here, but have the option to attend on Zoom. I would ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards in front of you. There's a short video. Please consult it. This is important for the health and safety of everyone here, especially our interpreters. Reminder, all comments should be addressed to the chair. For members of the room, if you wish to speak, raise your hand. If you end up on Zoom for some reason, use the raised hand feature. I would like to welcome our first panel from the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, Nicole Giles. She's the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister and Deputy Director, Policy and Strategic Partnerships. And from the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Sébastien Aubertin-Giguère, the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister and National Counter-Foreign Interference Coordinator. You both must have extensive business cards. But anyway, you have 5 minutes to make an opening statement, but I believe only Monsieur Aubertin-Giguère will make a statement today. 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, Sébastien Aubertin-Giguère, je suis le coordinateur national de la lutte contre l'ingérence étrangère en sécurité publique.
There's no translation.
English channel, English channel. English channel. Good morning. My name is Sébastien Aubertin-Giguère. I'm Associate Assistant Deputy Minister and National Counter Foreign Interference Coordinator. My responsibilities include coordinating government-wide initiatives to counter foreign interference, combating transnational repression, and overseeing the implementation of the Foreign Influence, Transparency and Accountability Act, also known as FITA. In the past few years, the Government of Canada has taken significant steps to reinforce its capacity to detect, deter, and respond to foreign interference targeting our democratic institutions and processes.
June 2024 as part of Bill C-70. And the Act establishes an independent commissioner and a public registry of foreign influence activities. It's designed to strengthen transparency in public affairs and to protect Canada's democratic institutions from undue foreign influence. Under FITA, the FITA framework, individuals or entities who enter into arrangements with foreign principals and undertake activities intended to influence governmental and political processes at any levels of government will be required to publicly register these activities. And this includes foreign influence efforts targeting federal, provincial, territorial, indigenous government decision-making, policy development, and legislative processes. Transparency is at the heart of this initiative to empower Canadians with the right knowledge. There's three key pieces that need to be in place for the Act to come into force. First, we need to establish the Office of the Foreign Influence Transparency Commissioner, the FITCO, including the appointment of a commissioner and then the supporting staff. Second, development of regulations, which will set out detailed requirements for registration, exemptions, and compliance. And then the development of an secure IT solution to support the registry, and then the case management behind it. So work is on the way on all aspects, and we're working towards bringing the Act into force as soon as possible. There's a dedicated transition team in place at Public Safety Canada to establish the FITCO. And we have a permanent space identified, and it's currently being retrofitted, but we have the interim space that's available right now to ensure continuity of operations. So the appointment process of the commissioner is governed by the Act, which requires consultations and approval by resolutions of both the House and the Senate. So potential candidates have been identified, and we have moved forward with the necessary steps to confirm suitability. Need a top secret clearance. There's a due diligence process required prior to formal consultations with the House and Senate leaders, and that reflects the sensitivity and importance of the role. The regulations are needed to set out detailed requirements for that information that must be disclosed to the commissioner, how the registry would operate, and the processes for enforcement and oversight. And we're working to deliver a fully integrated, robust registry to support and have the supporting infrastructure and tools to effectively administer the Act. So lastly, we're working closely with national security partners and other government departments and agencies to develop compliance and enforcement policies that are clear and effective. Enforcement mechanisms will ensure compliance and maintain confidence in the registry. So I look forward to your questions about this important initiative.
Thank you so much. We'll now turn to questions. Mr. Cooper from the Conservatives for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I'll start with Assistant Deputy Minister Oberton Jaguar. With regards to the Foreign Influence Registry, the Liberal government promised to get it up and running no later than June of this year, 1 year after Bill C-70 received royal assent. It's 6 months later, and as you noted, we don't have a registry in place. We don't even have a commissioner appointed. So in the face of that, when can we expect the registry to be up and running? You said as soon as possible, but what exactly does that mean?
So all the necessary elements need to be in place for the regime for the law to come into force. So it means essentially that you need to have the office and the necessary staff. You need to have the IT solution and then the regulations in place before coming into force. All these elements are being worked on right now, advancing. We're very close to the finish line.
I appreciate that, but we've had a series of dates. First of all, it was June. Well, actually, it was before the next election, but at the latest in June, 1 year after royal assent. We had an election. It wasn't in place. June came and went. No commissioner, no office, no registry. The Minister of Public Safety then said in the summer that a commissioner will be appointed by mid-September. You've said that we don't have a commissioner. We don't even have a final candidate selected yet by the government. And the minister also said December the registry would be in place. But as you noted, there are certain steps that have to be taken, including leaders of recognized parties, among other things, being consulted about the commissioner that was supposed to be in place in mid-September. So we've had date after date promised and date after date missed. So again, I ask, what is the timeline?
The initial timeline was based on the expectation that there will be an election no later than October 2025. But the early elections made us revisit the timelines. The minister was stated publicly that he has identified a preferred candidate, and we're working towards completing the necessary consultation steps. That's all I can say at this point, and to say that all the necessary elements for the delivery and the implementation of the Act are being worked on, and we're very, very close to the finish line.
Thank you. So so you're not able to provide a timeline. Is that fair? You can't provide a date. Can you provide an approximate date? Are we looking at, is it 6 months? Is it a year? Can you provide any, do you have any insight with regards to that?
Well, I'm not in a position to commit the minister to a specific date. What I can say is that we are very, very close to the finish line.
Well,
and the minister's statements reflect his sort of desire to have this implemented as soon as possible.
Okay. Now, with respect to the consultation process with regards to a commissioner, you said the minister has selected a candidate, has a preferred candidate. Can you just clarify what you said?
I just want to say what the minister has said. He has identified a candidate, very high-quality candidate.
Okay. Thank you
Yep.
for that. And has the consultation process with leaders of recognized parties begun with respect to that individual? Yes or no?
If they have been done?
Have they been done? Have they been
No,
commenced?
not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So still a lot of work to be done because the minister said all the way back in June that he was very close to the finish line, and here we are 6 months later. Now, Ms. Giles, I just want to ask you, were any accredited diplomats on CSIS's radar for interference-related activities in the lead-up to or during the 2025 federal election?
Thank you, Mr. Cooper, for the question and through the chair. Part of our responsibility is to be constantly vigilant and to be constantly monitoring and examining any potential acts of foreign interference that might be occurring on Canadian soil. So part of our job is to ensure that we are scanning, that we're monitoring, and that we constantly have our eye on whether there are any diplomats or any other individuals in Canada who could be perpetrating activities that are not allowed.
And can you answer whether any such accredited diplomats were identified as being involved in interference-related activities in the lead-up to or during the 2025 election?
So during the 2025 election, or G45 in our nomenclature, one of the things that was done differently by the site task force, so this is the task force for security and intelligence that was brought together to provide advice to the government and to Canadians during the election, is we did do weekly technical briefings to the media and to Canadians on foreign interference threats that were identified. There were no threats that were reported as part of that process that were emerging from diplomats during the election. There were 2 incidents, potential incidents of foreign interference that were identified and that were reported through the technical briefing
And I
process.
understand.
Thank you so much. You're over time, Mr. Cooper. And we'll now turn to Madame Kayabaga from the Liberals for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I would, through you, like to welcome our witnesses. I'm just going to start with you, Mr. Aubertin Giguère. C'est comme ça? D'accord. So our law enforcement agencies at the federal, provincial, territorial, and Indigenous levels play an essential role in countering foreign interference. I'm just curious to know what recently we've seen that law enforcement demand that lawful access be updated. So I'd like to hear your view on lawful access in relation to defending Canadians against hostile foreign actors.
Not my file, but I can say to the proposal that are legislative proposals that are in front of Parliament, that it is quite essential for law enforcement agencies to have modern tools to be able to access information lawfully, to be able to address the threats.
Obviously, this is a tool that you think would be really important to help address foreign interference.
Sorry.
Is this an important technological tool that you think would be helpful in addressing foreign interference in Canada?
Yes, absolutely. This on top of
Many other things.
Any enforcement of Canadian legislation in general.
And do you mind describing the measures and mechanism that security and intelligence community currently have in place to counter foreign interference and transnational repression in Canada?
Well, there's many tools that the federal government have to monitor and to counter and disrupt foreign interference. But I say when it comes to transnational repression itself, collectively at the federal level, what we've sort of prioritized is to make sure that individuals who are either victims or potentially at risk of transnational repression have the right knowledge to better protect themselves. So we've been doing workshops across Canada to engage directly with communities at risk and teaching them essentially what are the laws that protect them, how do you sort of engage with the police, how do you tell your story so that police of jurisdiction, when they first encounter these cases, know what to do with the information. We also teach them the basics of digital security, personal security, what to do when you travel. So at least on a personal level, and we also make sure that they are being introduced to local police of jurisdiction and federal law enforcement. So at the very least, they know that we're there to protect them. They have the right knowledge to protect themselves, and then we establish this relationship. That's one of the many tools that we have in place, but we've been sort of prioritizing this approach.
What do you see as the role of provincial governments and the provinces and the territories, as well as the different bodies that are partners in addressing this issue? What do you think is their role in all of this?
Well, the foreign interference affects all levels of government, so it is the role of all levels of government to be vigilant and aware. So we have, and my colleagues from the service are part of this exercise. We are engaging quite often and regularly with our provincial and municipal colleagues to discuss the threat and then what we can do for in terms of response. When it comes to transnational repression itself, I think awareness is the first step, making sure that they understand the threat landscape. We have briefed our provincial officials and certain at their request to give them a perspective on the sort of the TNR, transnational repression threat landscape in their provinces, and then discuss response options.
We've obviously seen diaspora communities being often targets of foreign intimidation, or even targets happen. They go through the diaspora communities. Could you maybe, Madame Gill, mention a couple of mechanisms that we may have in place to protect and counter those tools that are used through the diaspora communities? One, to intimidate them. Sometimes it's intimidation through repercussions on their families that are still maybe back in their countries. Like, what tools are we offering our diaspora communities to feel safe enough to want to call it out and to make sure that they stay safe from foreign interference?
This is one of the most significant issues that is targeting Canadians directly, and so it's obviously an area of significant concern for CSIS and for the activities that we undertake. And what we do find is that transnational repression does really disproportionately target human rights and political activists, journalists, others in cultural, ethnic, and religious groups. And so what we've observed is that in Canada is very often in the form of surveillance, in the form of spreading false and discrediting information, in the form of extortion, in the form of, as you mentioned, threatening loved ones abroad, and of course, in the most extreme format, threats to safety and to life. So we do see the full range of activities, and what we're doing is we're carrying out the activities that we have within our mandate to investigate, to collect intelligence, to advise, but then also to build the resiliency of these groups that are most targeted under the authorities that Parliament gave us as part of C70.
Thank you so much. We'll turn to the bloc. Madame Normandin, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup.
6 minutes, please. Thank you very much. My first question would be for you, Ms. Giles. In the Johnston report on foreign interference, one of the cracks in the system was that there is no traceability for certain documents that are sent to various departments, and we know that an email could be sent on and forwarded to others, but there's no way of tracking who. So is that a crack that has been filled, that has been fixed? We want to make sure these emails are traceable. Yes, that's an excellent question, and that's one of the issues we have looked at very closely after the investigations.
That there is very clear tracking of documents that have been sent to ministries so that we understand who it's gone to, and we can provide direction on those individuals that might require that information and intelligence to be able to inform their actions and their decisions. And we've also put in place various measures to ensure that we're able to help ensure that the advice is provided along with that information to help inform decision makers. And so there is an improved system of tracking of the documentation, and there's an improved system of proactive provision of that intelligence, so it is getting to the right hands at the right time.
Merci beaucoup. Dans la même veine, on sait que le Canada fait partie des Five Eyes, fait partie d'un groupe d'échange.
Thank you very much. And we know that Canada is part of the Five Eyes, a group of countries that shares intelligence. Now, the fact that there's no traceability in Canada, has that been something that's gotten in the way? Is there possibly a situation where the Five Eyes, other members of the Five Eyes, may have withheld information knowing that we weren't properly protected here? Another great question.
The sharing of information. So it's us, the UK, the US, Australia, and New Zealand. We work very closely together to ensure that we're sharing the information that's appropriate with each other so that the appropriate actions can be taken. We also work very carefully to ensure that there's a strong element of trust that exists between the alliance. When there are issues that emerge, as with all strong alliances and relationships, we're able to share the information. We're able to work through whatever issues might emerge. So at this point, we are not concerned about the information sharing is flowing as it should between members of the Five Eyes Alliance. And we're also very confident that we're receiving the information that we require to be able to execute our mandate for Canadians.
Merci. Peut-être des questions pour
Thank
vous.
you very much. Now, Mr. Giguère, turning to you, my Conservative colleagues talked about appointment of a commissioner. You talked about regulation and the setting up of an IT system for the registry. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. The legislation has been in place for a year and a half now, and there are orders in council that can be issued for appointments, for example. What is the essential information missing to make sure that we can make sure this registry is set up? Well, there's a regulatory process, and it usually takes 18 months to 24 months, depending on the government and what's happening. But the regulatory process is working quite well. It's making good progress. There's essentially no problem there. And as I stated, we're really very close to setting it up and being done with the process. Could you give us an idea of what's missing still in terms of the regulatory process so that we can have an effective and efficient registry? Well, there are a number of elements in the legislation that require certain things to be set out in the regulation. For example, what kind of information needs to be sent to the commissioner, how that information is presented in the registry, for example, and agreements for information sharing and intelligence sharing with partners. There are other elements like that, but those are the main ones. And in terms of the technical side, in the past we've seen, unfortunately, a few examples where the government doesn't always have great success with IT tools and that kind of thing. So are we aiming for something done in-house? Is there a partnership with a private business to set up this registry on the IT side? Well, there are two things. First, there will be a website with a solution for the public to provide information to the commissioner, so a public registry also that can be put in place for when the act comes into force. And we're also working on a more long-term solution, and we do have a procurement process in place, or that is imminent, in fact, so that we can work with probably an external partner, we'll see, based on the procurement process for that long-term solution. I have little time left, but in terms of the information that will be collected, I understand that the registry, its aim is to be public, but will there be sensitive information also that will be collected from people who want to be part of the registry, for example, or access the registry? Well, once again, it depends on the regulations, but there won't be much leeway since things will be published in the registry. Of course, people's public and privacy information will not be published, but there won't be any information beyond what's absolutely necessary for the registry.
I will let everyone know. Just given the time, I'll add a minute to everyone's time coming up. So, Mr. Cooper, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Giles, just to follow up where I left off, you concluded by referencing the site task force report in respect of 2 incidents that were made public by the Critical Election Incident Public Protocol panel. But my question was more general, and that was simply whether there were interference-related activities that were identified in respect of accredited diplomats in Canada in the lead up to or during the 2025 election.
So what was observed over the course of the election, the immediate period beforehand as well, was really observed instances of foreign interference such as transnational repression, such as inauthentic and coordinated amplification of online content and online threats as well, such as scams and disinformation. We observe this very much at the small scale. It is often very difficult to attribute certain activities to a specific foreign actor, but ultimately the conclusion was that this did not interfere with Canadians' ability to have a free and fair election.
Now, to be clear, the site task force in its report identified specifically Beijing as being involved in transnational repression efforts as well as disinformation campaigns using social media platforms to target certain candidates or to influence the election. That's fair, right? That's in the report. This is an issue. These are activities Beijing broadly was involved in.
The task force identified at the outset of the election what it was anticipating in terms of likely behavior and would likely continue. And then it also identified in the course of the election the 2 incidents that you're referring to, sir, as being elements and platforms that are based in China and that are linked to PRC actors.
Thank you for that. Now, it's now well established that in the 2019 and 2021 federal elections, accredited diplomats from Beijing, including diplomats operating out of Beijing's Vancouver consulate and Toronto consulate, engaged in interference activities. Can you provide the assurance that no Beijing accredited diplomats engaged in such interference activities during the 2025 election? Can you provide that assurance?
I think the after action report was a really great evolution in terms of being able to provide the direct information to Canadians, including parliamentarians, in terms of threats that were observed to the election. And as mentioned, the threats that were observed were really small scale. It was related to TNR. It was related to the online activities.
Respectfully, I would disagree with you. I don't think the activities in, for example, Don Valley North were small scale. Is that your characterization of what happened in Don Valley North?
What I'm referring to is the size of the activities, the impact certainly in Don Valley North on the constituents and on Mr. Tay specifically is not small scale at all, and what was experienced is very significant to those individuals.
Precisely, and that's why I'm asking whether you can provide the assurance that no Beijing diplomats were involved in such interference activities.
I think that the after action report was very clear in terms of what was observed and what was reported by the task force. And again, while the impact on those individuals in that particular riding was very significant, the overall activities of attempted interference or potential interference in the election did not have a large scale or impact on Canadians' ability to have a free and fair election.
I'm not hearing an answer but yes, you can provide that assurance. So I take it that you can't fully provide that assurance that Beijing diplomats were not involved, that they may in fact well have been, may very well have been involved in such activities. So hypothetically, if CSIS was aware that an accredited diplomat was involved in interference activities, would that information be passed on eventually to the Minister of Foreign Affairs?
So I would just like to clarify, Mr. Chair, that as reported, we reported the activities that we did observe, and the activities that we observed did not include any activities by accredited diplomats. So I just want to clarify that at this point in terms of what the report referred to. And certainly, if there were activities that we had observed that did involve the behavior of foreign accredited diplomats in Canada, that is exactly the type of information that would be provided to our global affairs colleagues, and of course through them to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Okay, so to be clear, in your answer, you referenced that CSIS did not observe activities by diplomats in respect of Don Valley North, correct? That was the answer that you provided, not more broadly than that.
During the 45th general election, as per the after action report, there was no reporting of activities of accredited diplomats engaging in potential or actual acts of foreign interference that was reported.
That were reported. But again, my question wasn't simply what was reported. My question was beyond what was reported.
You're at 6 minutes, Mr. Cooper. Unless you have a very quick answer.
Mr. Chair, we have reported what we saw, and what was reported and what we saw was not those activities as the member is referring to.
Thank you so much. Madame Brière, 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for our witnesses for being with us this morning. We know that threats are evolving very quickly. For example, foreign interference, sabotage, cyber threats, and so on. How is CSIS planning to adapt its resources and priorities in the short and long term to remain effective? Thank you very much for this question. That's an excellent question. So one of the things we are doing is to always pivot and redirect our resources when we see threats and in response to threats.
Is as different threats emerge, as the threats evolve, we are adjusting our investigations, we are adjusting our collection efforts, and we're adjusting our response. And that can include the redistribution of resources or the moving them from one investigation or area of activity or assessment to another. Mr. Rogers, the director of CSIS, did speak about this in his annual speech, which was given a couple of weeks ago.
Est-ce qu'il y a des choses que vous devez faire en particulier?
Are there any things you need to do in particular to protect the Arctic in that same vein? Yes, of course. The Arctic is one of the issues that concerns us and many other Canadians.
That we are continuing our collection. We're working with our partners up north, who, of course, are potential targets of economic security threats, of espionage, of other security threats, to ensure that they have the information that they need to be resilient. And, of course, we're working with our private sector partners as well to ensure that they have the information to protect themselves from potential threats up north as well.
On a parlé tantôt des...
Earlier, we talked about the Five Eyes. What's the role of our closest allies to ensure that we can fight against foreign interference? And do you think there are any lessons we can learn from our Five Eyes partners to improve our own methods and responses to foreign interference? Once again, an excellent question. One of the things we are doing that is very relevant to Canada, that we see with our allies, is that when we work as a partnership and as an alliance, we are all better equipped.
When we work together in alliance, and that's one of the things that distinguishes us from our adversaries, is having those enduring relationships of trust where there's shared interests. So we are in a constant pattern of providing information and our experiences to our Five Eyes partners and our allies, and also receiving from them, again, the lessons learned. And I think that's one of the things that we saw in the setting up of the registry, was learning lessons from our international partners, for example.
Est-ce que vous aimeriez rajouter quelque chose par rapport à cette question-là?
Is there anything you'd like to add? No, Ms. Giles covered the issue. Now, more generally, what is the importance for all Canadians, from elected members to university students, for example, to be aware and to know more about the threat of foreign interference?
Encore, c'est une très bonne question.
Once again, an excellent question.
Is to ensure that we have an aware and well-educated public, so that they can identify the threats in advance, so that they can take measures to protect themselves, to build their resiliency, to prevent the threats from materializing in the first place. And so for that reason, one of the things that CSIS does is a campaign of resiliency disclosures to ensure that that information is provided. We do put a series of publications out, which this morning I've shared with the chair and vice chairs, the very snappily named Foreign Interference and You publication that helps people identify the foreign interference. But then really critically, we work very closely with all our partners across Canada to ensure that they understand the threat. And critically, it's a two-way street. If they see something, if they observe the threat, that they're also able to share that information with CSIS, so that that can also inform our investigations and our collection.
Êtes-vous capable de nous brosser?
Could you give us an idea of what a foreign interference actor looks like in Canada? Not the criteria, but the types of things they might do, or any common points you find between these foreign interference actors. Well, there are a number of different methods and techniques, and many different types of people who engage in these kinds of activities. What we find is that, in terms of CSIS's mandate, is that when these are clandestine activities,
are clandestine, when they're deceptive, covert, that is when it reaches CSIS's threshold for investigation and for action. And so what we tend to see is attempts to obfuscate the role that a particular foreign state may have, or proxy actors might have. But what we do see is foreign states undertaking these activities to try to advance their strategic interests at the expense of Canada's.
Thank you so much. Madame Normandin, 3.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Gage, j'aimerais...
Thank you very much. Ms. Giles, I'd like to come back to this issue of traceability. We know that at GAC, Global Affairs, there is a revolving door in terms of the people working there, the officials. Are documents of this type sent to personalized or general addresses in terms of sensitive information and so on? Well, for the methods used at Global Affairs, they're the ones who need to give that information.
Information over, that there are follow-ups to ensure that the information is getting to the right people at the right time. There's also a series of different committees that assistant deputy ministers do sit on, where we discuss the intelligence that has been seen to ensure that there's awareness of the threat so that it can be acted upon.
Votre question implique que l'information...
If I may, yes, your question implies that the information is often sent by email, which is not generally the case. Usually it goes through somebody who is vetting and actually looking at who that information should be called to, and so on. So in each department, there are people in charge of information monitoring. Thank you very much. And that leads to my second question, or another question. One of the issues we looked at a lot through the Johnston report was how knowing whether that information is sent to the people who are concerned. For example, with the Prime Minister, it was a lot of he said, she said. Did he actually get the information? Is there a formal obligation to send the information to the Prime Minister with the possibility of confirmation that that information was received, and that would avoid the types of situation that led to the Johnston report?
Alors, pour l'information qui s'est passée.
In terms of the information sent to the Prime Minister, it's really the Privy Council office that is responsible for that kind of information or managing it. It's not CSIS that will be providing that kind of information or sending emails to the department.
Advisor to the Prime Minister that does ensure that the information that they deem relevant makes it to the Prime Minister. I think that's been spoken to quite extensively in the Oak Commission as well as in various committees. What we do ensure from a CSIS perspective is that if there is a critical piece of information, we do ensure we work with our colleagues and our partners to ensure that the right ministers, that the Prime Minister has seen the information. And there is now as well quite an extensive governance structure that's been set up by the National Security and Intelligence Advisor, which includes a committee of deputy ministers that do regularly meet and talk about the intelligence that is being seen and then taking decisions on what might need to be moved up the chain.
There were 3 seconds left, but I'll give it to you next time. Mr. Van Popta, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. Ms. Giles, I have a question for you. So when Mr. Cooper was engaging in a conversation with you just a little while ago, you had said that despite foreign interference in our last few elections, that interference did not amount to interfering with Canadians' ability to hold free and fair elections. And I think in that you're echoing what Madam Justice Hogue said in her report, that despite occurrences of foreign interference in 2019 and 2021, the election results at the national level were not affected. In other words, with or without foreign interference, the election results would have been the same, minority Liberal government with Mr. Trudeau as the Prime Minister. But can the same be said at the local level? And I'm thinking of perhaps Don Valley North, or in the 2021 election, Richmond East Steveston. Can you assure Canadians that the election results, the elections there were fair and free despite obvious foreign interference in those campaigns?
So I think that, as you mentioned, the report from Madame Hogue, the report from Mr. Johnson, the after action report that emerged after GE 45 from SITE, as well as from the panel of senior officials, were all very clear in terms of the ultimate impact on Canadians' ability to have a free and fair election, which is that there was none.
What does ultimate impact mean? Does that mean at the national level, or does that also telescope down to specific ridings?
That means that at the national level, I think as well that the reports did not go into every individual specific riding, and I also just want to clarify
I think there were 2 or 3 that were important.
The responsibility of CSIS, and it would be inappropriate for an intelligence agency to be responsible for passing judgment on each and every individual riding. That is not the responsibility of the intelligence agency. We support those assessments by providing information and intelligence to to Canada Elections, to the Elections Commissioner who do make those decisions. What we saw in GE 45 was that there were, as mentioned, a couple of incidents that were related primarily to transnational repression, to the manipulation of information, but the determination was that it did also not ultimately impact the outcome of any of those races.
And the ultimate outcome is that there was a minority Liberal government with the Conservatives being in the opposition again, but it does not telescope down to specific ridings. Some ridings may have gone the other way if it hadn't been for foreign interference. At least that possibility is open.
I don't want to be in a position in this committee to question the findings of previous reports, and I'm certainly not in a position to be able to do so. I think the government stands by the reports that have been previously issued.
Okay, thank you. You were here, Ms. Giles, just to continue with you for a moment. You appeared before the Ethics Committee on May 21, 2024, and I'm reading from your testimony there. CSIS has long-standing investigations into specific threat actors believed to be targeting Canada's democratic institutions through clandestine, deceptive, and threatening means. This is foreign interference. So, how do you identify threat actors? And I know Ms. Briere was asking you questions about that. Like at what point do you say this is a threat actor that we need to follow?
Again, a good question. There's a variety of ways that threat actors will come to our attention, and certainly we are constantly in a process of putting our resources to the most significant threats to Canada. But as part of that, there are certain thresholds that have to be met in order for CSIS to be able to instigate an investigation. So there are thresholds that need to be met in terms of reasonable grounds to suspect, in terms of reasonable grounds to believe when we use certain of our authorities. So there's a variety of sets of information that come to us. Some of that information is information that we have collected ourselves as an intelligence service. Sometimes there's information that is provided to us by partners that will help to inform our assessment of those threats. And then, as mentioned by your colleagues, critically, there will often be information that comes to us from foreign partners that also helps to inform our decision on whether to put our attentions towards a particular threat or a particular series of threats that are manifesting.
At what point do you involve the candidates and bring them into the discussion, informing them that perhaps they are being subjects of or targeted by foreign interference players? I don't want to use myself as an example. I'm sure all of us have a situation where we have many citizens in our ridings who speak different languages that I don't speak, for example, Chinese or Korean. And most people get their information off of social media nowadays. I can't read what they're reading. Is somebody tracking this, or am I vulnerable here?
Very quick answer, please.
One of the measures that was set up for GE45 was a mechanism for candidates to be able to provide information to the Privy Council office and through them to the site task force if there were concerns that were identified. There was also a very robust system of briefings that were set up to cleared members of all of your parties.
Thank you so much. Mr. Wilkinson, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you to both of the witnesses for coming. Maybe just ask you a question around, obviously one of the big changes that we've seen in the last few years is the rise of artificial intelligence. And I guess I'd be interested in maybe both of you speaking to how big a threat is this from a foreign interference perspective, and what are we doing in the context of trying to address those threats?
So I think one of the challenges that we face is as we as a country and certainly we as an intelligence service are facing an increasing velocity and volume of threats. It is being amplified by advances in technologies, including certainly artificial interference. And so that is increasing very much the sophistication of foreign states and other actors as they're seeking to perpetrate those threats. One of the things that we are doing as Canada's Intelligence Service is ensuring that we are constantly challenging ourselves to adopt new technology, to adopt new techniques, and then also to work with our foreign partners to be able to learn from them and to be able to share information and techniques as we're seeking to counter those threats. But it's certainly a challenge, but a challenge that CSIS is up to tackling.
Did you want to add anything to that?
Artificial intelligence reduces the sort of the entry threshold for threat actors to conduct information operations. That's something to. It also helps in the response because you can also leverage AI. So it's kind of an arms race in many ways, but the government of Canada is quite aware of this evolution, and we're constantly looking for options and policy options to make sure that we are up to date in our capacity to monitor the threat landscape and to respond.
Let me ask you a similar question, but with respect to social media. Certainly, social media manipulation is something that people, I think, are increasingly concerned about. And as Mr. Van Popta said, many people get their news these days through social media platforms. Same thing in terms of how are you folks engaging that, and particularly as it relates to the election, what's the engagement with the social media platforms when we have concerns?
Well, the Privy Council office was maintaining a table of engagement with social media platforms during the election period, raising issues, discussing specific files. Also that RM Canada, which is at the Global Affairs, Rapid Response Mechanism at Global Affairs Canada was also engaging with platforms in specific cases where problematic information was found online, and so these mechanisms already exist.
We talk a lot about this particular election and other federal elections. I'm curious as to what do we do with respect to provincial elections or municipal elections where these issues also can come into play? How do we engage those levels of government, and how do we share information, which at times I know has been a challenge in the past?
One of the things that is, I think, most challenging in the evolution of the threat landscape has been that the targets of these threat activities are no longer simply the federal government. It's all levels of government. It's municipal, it's provincial, it's territorial, it's also Indigenous. And so one of the things that we do is that we engage with those multiple levels of government to ensure that they're aware of the threats, and then also to be able to provide information to help them better understand the threat and counter the threat where it's appropriate. And so, for example, through our regional offices across Canada, our regional officers will be engaged and working closely with provinces and territories, elections commissions, to ensure that they're receiving the information that they require, and that we're providing advice on how to identify and to try to mitigate those threats. So we work quite closely with all levels of government, including Indigenous partners.
We still have time? Great. You referenced the speech that your boss gave a month ago, and we touched on this a little bit. But in the speech, he stressed the importance of public resilience and informed citizens. And I hear you in terms of putting out publications. But if we really actually think that a better informed citizenry is extremely important in the context of addressing this, what more do we need to do? Because it seems to me that that's not nearly enough.
I think that one of the challenges is that there is so much noise and information that's coming at Canadians constantly. I think it's a challenge that we all share in terms of how we cut through that noise to ensure that it's really specific and focused information. And CSIS is part of this ecosystem. So we will put our information out. For those of you who don't know, we have a YouTube channel where we also put information. So we are doing our best to engage with the multiple forms of media, as well as doing the one-on-one engagement with communities and various parts of civil society and levels of government. But this is not a CSIS-only responsibility. It is a whole of society responsibility, and that includes media, some of whom are in the room with us today. It includes academics. It includes politicians. So we need to all be working together to ensure that that information is being provided to Canadians, and that we are also listening to Canadians, that we're not just talking to them.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank our witnesses. We will suspend for 5 minutes while we change our panel. Our second panel, Wesley Wark, Senior Fellow, Center for Innovation, Governance, and Innovation. Joe Tay, a former Conservative candidate from Don Valley North by Zoom. And from DisinfoWatch, Marcus Kolga, founder and director. We'll start with the individuals in the room for 5 minutes. We'll go Mr. Wark for 5 minutes, please.
Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to appear and speak to the issue of the implementation of the Foreign Influence Transparency Registry, and I'll refer to it in these brief remarks as the FITR. This will be my third kick at this particular can. I took part in stakeholder discussions on the FITR, which were actually run by Mr. Aubertin-Giguère prior to the tabling of Bill C-70. I testified on C-70 during its very rapid passage through Parliament in June 2024, and here I am again. I will begin with a point I'm sure we can all agree on, that the government needs to get on with implementing FITR. I won't go into the details of what that requires. You've heard a bit about that already. Now I'm going to make some observations that might find less agreement in this room. The concept of the FITR is based on three broad principles: that it would serve as a deterrent, that it be country agnostic, and that it enhance transparency objectives. The rationale underlying these principles is easy to understand, including the desire to ensure that the FITR was not seen as a blacklist for diplomatic or societal purposes. In designing the Foreign Influence Transparency Registry, government officials had access to the Australian experience, which dates back to 2018, and to the building of the UK Foreign Influence Registration Scheme with its two-tier approach. In my view, the ineffectiveness of the Australian model and the changes of approach introduced by the UK were not taken sufficiently into consideration in the building of the Canadian scheme. While valuable as a deterrent and transparency scheme, the FITR addresses political foreign influence and will have little impact on covert practices of foreign interference. There is a risk, in my view again, that the FITR becomes a wasteful register of good guys. Wasteful because of the country-agnostic approach and to the extent that it draws resources away from dedicated intelligence collection and analysis and from law enforcement endeavors. It may prove ineffective, as I would suggest the Australian model has been. Certainly, it should not be oversold as any kind of panacea, and it will be duplicative of other efforts by the security intelligence agencies at community engagement and even public education. Part 4 of Bill C-70 is, of course, law. My point is not to suggest that it be undone, but I do want to draw the committee's attention to two things by way of conclusion. One is the importance of Parliament continuing to scrutinize the effectiveness of the FITR regime once it's established over the long term. And this could include future scrutiny by the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. The other, more immediate, is to call your attention to Section 31(1) of the legislation, which calls for, I quote, a comprehensive review of this Act and its operation by a committee of Parliament, again I quote, during the first year after a general election, unquote. This time frame for a statutory review is highly unusual, as you will all know. In theory, that time is now, although it would be absurd to launch such a review before FITR had actually come into operation. But this statutory requirement should be timed, in my view, to begin following the tabling in Parliament of the FITR Commissioner's first annual report. This would give Parliament the opportunity to seriously consider whether a country-agnostic approach is the correct one, or whether the British approach might be better suited to our needs, and to gauge whether the adoption of something like the British two-tier approach, including the capacity of a minister to designate countries of special national security concern, would be more appropriate to the Canadian situation. It would also give Parliament an early chance to weigh in on the designs for public guidance that will be crucial to the operations of the FITR. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll now turn to Mr. Kolga for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair and honourable members of this committee. It is an honour to appear before you today. I've also been asked to comment on FITR implementation. For nearly 15 years, I've worked to document and expose foreign interference targeting Canada, whether orchestrated by the Kremlin, Beijing, Tehran, or Minsk, since 2020. Much of this work has been carried out through DisinfoWatch, the organization I founded to monitor and counter these threats. In parallel, I've spent just as long advocating for human rights defenders and pro-democracy activists, those struggling for freedom inside authoritarian states and those in exile who continue their work while facing harassment, intimidation, and transnational repression from the regimes they oppose. For that work, I am one of 3 Canadians named to both the Chinese and Russian sanctions lists, along with my colleagues Charles Burton and Sarah Teich. The efforts of foreign authoritarian governments to undermine the integrity of our democracy, pollute our information space with falsehoods, erode social cohesion, and silence critics constitutes a direct threat to Canada's democratic and cognitive sovereignty. Democratic sovereignty is our ability to govern ourselves without external coercion. Cognitive sovereignty is our ability to form opinions and participate in our democracy based on facts, not narratives engineered abroad to distort our understanding of events. Today, hostile authoritarian states are attacking both. They do not need tanks or missiles. Instead, they use covert influence networks, disinformation, intimidation of diaspora communities, and the deliberate exploitation of our democratic openness. Their aim is clear: weaken trust, polarize society, manipulate our policy debates to serve their own interests, and silence those who challenge them. We've already seen these violations here in Canada. Threats from the Chinese government against activists who stand for office, such as Joe Tay, represent a direct assault on our democratic sovereignty. Members of Parliament Jenny Kwan and Kenny Chiu have also been targeted by coordinated disinformation campaigns designed to intimidate voters and punish critics of the Chinese Communist Party. Members of the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project and Canadian Tibet Committee have been sanctioned by Beijing without any meaningful Canadian response. Russia's disinformation and foreign influence operations are equally aggressive and extensively documented. Ukrainian and Baltic communities in Canada have long been targeted by Kremlin narratives designed to dehumanize them, falsely branding them as fascists and enemies of Canada, just as Russia has attempted to smear Ukraine's democratically elected Jewish president with the same slur. These narratives are a form of incitement to hate that has fueled real-world harassment and vandalism here in Canada. Much of the danger comes from the use of local Canadian proxies, some knowingly, others drawn in by pressure, ideology, even profit. Moscow has relied on recruiting susceptible Canadians for nearly a century, a pattern revealed in the 1945 Guzenko affair. Now, without credible deterrence, meaning transparency, accountability, and consequences, our adversaries will continue to exploit these blind spots. That means holding accountable those who carry out these operations and, where appropriate, using sanctions laws to impose meaningful costs. In June 2024, thanks in large part to the advocacy of vulnerable communities, including the Coalition for a Foreign Influence Transparency Registry led by Gloria Fung, Parliament passed the FITR Act. Passing the act was an important step towards transparency, but legislation alone does not defend us. Implementation does. Repeated delays in operationalizing the registry risk sending conflicting signals about Canada's commitment to confronting foreign interference. At the same time, it is essential that public servants developing the regulations are given the time and resources to get them right. Ensuring the registry's purpose is clear, its infrastructure easy to navigate, and that it is enforceable in a consistent and meaningful way. We will not get a second chance at implementation. But delays beyond spring 2026 would considerably erode the trust of the communities most vulnerable to foreign intimidation and cast doubt on Canada's determination to defend its democratic sovereignty. Finally, the commissioner appointed to oversee the registry must have a deep and comprehensive understanding of the full spectrum of foreign influence threats. Not only those posed by the Chinese Communist Party, but also Russia, Iran, and other authoritarian actors. Anything less risks creating more blind spots that our adversaries will definitely exploit. Thank you again for asking me to appear, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Tay, please, for 5 minutes. Can you hear me, Mr. Tay? I believe you're on mute. If you can start again.
Can you hear me now, everyone?
We can hear you now.
Okay.
Please start from scratch.
Okay, if I may, thank you. Chair and honorable members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Joe Tay, a Canadian citizen, former singer, actor in Hong Kong, and the Federal Conservative Party candidate for Don Valley North from last election. I'm here to give my first-hand evidence of foreign election interference. Presently, there are 300,000 Canadians who chose to build their careers like myself between Canada and Hong Kong. Transnational repression is real, highly sophisticated, coordinated, and totally destructive aim to silence voices, end careers, and erase people from their public life. For over 30 years in media, I'm blessed to become a household name within my community worldwide. Until 2019, when I openly supported the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, my career was abruptly terminated. I was told to stop speaking out or never work again. And days before the national security law of Hong Kong came into effect, I returned to Canada, yet the repression followed me and my family here. During my 2024 campaign, I faced non-stop foreign election interference. Number one, coordinated disinformation during election. Canada's security and intelligence threats to election task force identify a coordinated foreign operation targeting Don Valley North across Chinese social media platforms and Facebook, aimed to curb any positive coverage and amplifying made-up negative news of me, painting me as a fugitive to voters. Number two, summoned by the Chinese consulate. During my nomination, a venue owner who hosted a birthday party, and I was invited among many guests, was summoned twice after the party by the Chinese consulate for allowing me on the premises. Complaint was made to the consulate, sadly, by 2 to 3 local city councillors, of whom the owner was too afraid to name them. Number three, my bounty encouraged by a sitting MP. The most dangerous incident of all was when Mr. Paul Chang, a former Liberal MP, was sworn to protect Canadians, openly ignore Canada's clear position and condemnation statement by Foreign Affairs issued within 24 hours after my bounty, and allow me to cite part of the statement. The attempt by Hong Kong authorities to conduct transnational repression abroad, including issuing threats, intimidation, and coercion against Canadians and those in Canada, will not be tolerated. Yet Mr. Paul Chang knowingly went on to organize a selective press conference attended by mainly Chinese consulate-friendly reporters, suggesting me that anyone who handed me to Chinese consulate could claim the $1 million bounty, expecting the press to make it more public. That puts me and my family in harm's way. And Paul making himself an instrument of CCP interference on the election. And to me, in my opinion, what's worse, it was the leader of the party then, of his party. Now our Prime Minister defended him and make excuse for Paul's for CCP position statement. Number four, harassment of my extended family. Hong Kong authorities interrogated and pressured my extended family in Hong Kong to make me a burden of my own relatives. Number five, administrative tools manipulations. Hong Kong HSBC Bank and Government Tax Agency of Hong Kong were used to extend as extended arms and tools to froze our accounts, false accusation of made-up tax evasion claim, attempting to administratively criminalize me in US and Canada. My wife, Angie, as an insurance agent, requires her to renew her license every 2 years. Any financial criminal offense worldwide will lead to her license suspension. Number six, surveillance and intimidation during campaigning. Volunteers and I were photographed, and our home being monitored by a strange vehicle were reported instantly to the local police and RCMP. Number seven, violent threat to one of our supporters. A lady supporter who just simply met me for a coffee chat received a parcel containing a dress splattered with red paint simulating blood stabbed through the chest. a graphic warning to not to support me. Targeting seniors, sending people door to door to senior apartments within our riding, spreading the same social media message within the Chinese community. If you vote for Zhou Tei, the Chinese consulate will know, and you will lose your visa to visit China. Targeting our seniors voters through direct intimidation, surveillance, travel restriction, and fear of retaliation, suppressing democratic rights. We know for a fact many were too afraid to vote. Finally, RCMP unscheduled visit. RCMP made an unscheduled visit to my house to inform me that they had intercepted a credible source that a threat to harm me during my election. Resulting all my campaign activities were suspended, and depending on day-to-day safety warnings till the end of the election resulted campaign become the quietest. Chair and honorable members, this CCP initiated foreign interference evidence of intent to harm, well-organized evil scheme that targets Canadians and our electoral institution, turning parliamentarians and councillors into bad actors, or at least used to erode trust in our institution. On behalf of my family and I am here with the hope that by speaking up, every Canadian and our democracy, of which so many live their lives down, will be protected. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll now turn to questions. We'll go to Mr. Cooper for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Tay, you referenced that Paul Chang, the then Liberal MP from Markham Unionville, convened a press conference with Chinese language media at which he specifically raised the bounty against you and encouraged community members to turn you in to Beijing's Toronto consulate. At the time, you were seeking the Conservative nomination in his riding, Markham Unionville. You characterized the press conference as selective. By that, what do you mean? Would it be fair to say that MP Chang organized the press conference for the purpose of publicizing the bounty against you and smearing your reputation within the Chinese diaspora communities in Markham Unionville and throughout the GTA?
I have sent to the committee secretary a list of the reports and the video. Too bad the time don't allow the translation, its interpretation, not enough time to make it. But the fact that I stress is selective because among the press conference, as shown in the video, there are many invited and only one that reported in the media, which is a mainland Chinese community-focused Mandarin-speaking media was reported, aiming to only target to the Chinese crowd. So the selective meaning within the crowd, there were many reporters within the venue, but only one media report the case, and that was the MingXingPao.com. It's one of subsidiary of Mingpao Daily in Canada. So the meaning of selective, I mean they select the platform to be publicized this public bounty, and those people who read those news are prone, whether they are, their ideology was with the China, or they want to during economic bad times they would want to harm me because of the money involved.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the fallout from that press conference within the diaspora communities on social media platforms, threats, intimidation? Would it be fair to say that they intensified as the awareness around, and maybe the broader issue of the awareness around the bounty and how that might have impacted your electoral prospects within in terms of support from diaspora community members?
Yes, right away, the actual media report was published on January 22nd, 2024. So immediately, a lot of the Chinese community, especially those of my volunteers, will come back and tell me that online on the WeChat platforms, on the Chinese social media platforms, describing me as a fugitive and there was a bounty, and all these comments on the side of the thousands comments were, among them there were people said, oh, it's a good time to get his head, or hurt him to get the bounty, and but the risk is actually because by that time I was just notified. I think because of my past career, I think this was just comments and not actual action. But the news was not picked up by the mainstream until maybe 1.5 months. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And on March 23rd, 2025, you became the Conservative candidate for Don Valley North. The next day, the RCMP attended to your home to warn you that they had intercepted credible threats to your safety. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is accurate.
And the RCMP contacted you at another point to tell you that it was no longer safe to canvass door to door. Is that correct?
Not at that moment.
No, I'm talking about later in the campaign.
Yes. That was, you are correct, accurate.
And so, can you explain a little bit about what happened there? As I understand it, you had to check in, or the RCMP would check in with you to tell you on a day-to-day basis whether it was safe for you to go door to door. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think especially when I was visited by the RCMP, since then on, I reported their visitation to the Conservative Party of Canada, the headquarters. So we have a discussion and communication between RCMP with the Conservative Party of Canada was established to exchange information, to make sure every day the updates of any threats will be advised to me, so that whether I will go out to do door knocking or canvassing, it really depends on the day-to-day basis safety advice.
So just to get an understanding of the level of threats, you were followed, correct?
Yes.
Your residence was surveilled?
My residence there was one incident I remember is.
And that was with a vehicle, right?
With a vehicle. It's strangely that when we almost come home, there was a strange car, because we know a neighborhood really well. And we never seen a car like that. So my wife was smart enough to ask me, hey, maybe we turn one more round and come back with another angle. That car has parked already closer to our house, and actually just outside a driveway. And yeah.
And volunteers were harassed and intimidated.
Yes or no answer? Yes or no? We're already over.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank both the witnesses. Canada has seen firsthand how hostile foreign actors attempt to distort our democracy and quietly influence our political process. The Foreign Influence Transparency Registry is the next step to shine a light on these covert arrangements and give Canadians more confidence that our democratic institutions are protected. So I want to thank both of you for your contributions and your time as the witnesses. I would start with Mr. Wark, the Senior Fellow for the Center of International Governance Innovation in Waterloo Region. So thank you very much for being here. You talk about the registry needing to be a deterrent and needing to increase transparency. And you say that more ongoing review will be necessary. What we're seeing is a bit of a cat and mouse between law enforcement and foreign actors. What would public guidance, in your words, you use the word public guidance, what would that look like?
Thank you for the question. What really comes to mind, and I think it's illustrative of what's ahead for the implementation of FITR, are the set of very detailed guidance publications put out by the UK scheme, which was one of the first things that they did as they set up their own scheme. So there's guidance about both tiers of their scheme, the enhanced tier and the regular tier, which are designed, I think, with two purposes in mind. One, to try and make sure that the public fully understands the nature of the registry and what it's trying to accomplish, but also to ensure that people who may find themselves required to register fully understand why they're required to register, what's involved, how elements of their data may be protected under the UK scheme. So you've heard a little bit in this committee about the steps that remain to be undertaken to get FITR up and running. But I would say that beyond the obvious steps of having a commissioner appointed, regulations made, and so on, the website established, to be able to put together these comprehensive documents of guidance is going to be a critical test for the effectiveness of this scheme.
Mr. Colga, I would give you the chance to respond to us, so you're nodding.
Well, thank you for the question. I mean, I don't have all that much to add. I mean, the question or the point that I would make is that anyone with legitimate business in this country and without anything to hide wouldn't have a problem registering with FITR. For example, if I were doing academic work with that's sponsored by one of our allies in NATO, for example, or NATO itself, I wouldn't have any issue registering myself on the FITR list, and I don't think anybody else would either. And I think we need to make sure that Canadians have that understanding of that process in terms of the registration for FITR.
Thank you for that. Mr. Wark, you've spoken about the importance of Canada having their own independent intelligence assessments, and we've heard from CSIS, we've heard from other organizations about information sharing. There's a balance between transparency and publicly available information. There's a balance between that and information that we can't share with the public, and then there is doing our own information and sharing and using other countries. What's your advice on the best way to find that our own information versus sharing information with other countries and being publicly available versus tipping our hand at what we're looking into?
Thank you for the question, Chair. It's a complex issue that any intelligence community or security intelligence community, including Canada, struggles with. I would say that it's perhaps typical in a Canadian context that we overstress the need to secure information against the need to inform the public. I think we've never found the appropriate balance between those two prerogatives. There are lots of efforts underway to increase transparency around national security and intelligence activities. I don't think we're anywhere close to the end of the road of those efforts, and I would just say to members of the committee that there are two things that I regret about recent developments. One is that when the government introduced its national security transparency commitment in 2017, not a law, but a commitment, it contained, I think, some very valuable principles around transparency and how it was to be delivered. I think very little of that has actually been acted on in the years since, 8 years since. The second, and this goes in a way to a question that Mr. Wilkinson asked earlier, in terms of things that still remain to be done, we are still waiting in this country for the issuance of a national security strategy. The last one was issued, as members will know, in 2004. A new one was promised in May 2024, and a bit like FITR, we're still waiting to see it appear. Thank you.
I have time for one more question. You cited Robert Hubert's warning that state actors may bandwagon on disinformation. What does bandwagon look like operationally, and how can we detect and counter that?
Marcus may want to take that question first. I'm happy to join in, Mark.
Sorry, if you could just repeat the...
Yeah, the term bandwagoning. I think bandwagoning. I believe you talk about taking information that maybe misinformation already exists and expanding on that.
Right. I mean, I've not heard that term before, bandwagoning, but certainly amplification of disinformation by domestic influencers is a very serious threat to our democracy. We've seen this happen. We've seen foreign authoritarians pay influencers to engage in these sorts of operations. Back in September of 2024, the U.S. Department of Justice issued an indictment against two employees of Russia Today, RT. This is Russia's state media platform. It's been identified by Global Affairs as a key component of Russia's intelligence operations. This scheme basically saw RT...
I'm going to have to, in a very rare moment, I'm going to have to cut you off. We are well over time. Hopefully we can get back into this. It's, I'm sure it'll be of of interest, or you could fit it into one of your future answers. To all the witnesses, the next set of questions will all be in French, so please, if you require, have your headset in to the appropriate channel. Mr. Tay, I'm sure they told you, have the channel on the appropriate, on the English channel, so you receive translation. Madame Normandin, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à l'ensemble des témoins pour votre
Ms.
participation.
Normandin. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to all witnesses for your participation. We very much appreciate it. Perhaps for the witnesses in the room, you talked a lot about the importance of making sure people are not encouraged. Now, you talked about the Uyghur and others. Are you getting interpretation? Perfect. So I'd like to, in response to what you mentioned about the intimidation of the Uyghurs and Tibetans and how Canada's response was not a strong one, and the need for the registry, this is kind of a parallel question. The Bloc Québécois tabled a bill aimed at working against the import of forced labor products, especially from Xinjiang, for example, the Uyghurs. The fact that there's a legislation of other aspects aside from just the registry, could that have a dissuasive effect?
Certainly, I strongly believe that the existence of the legislation, of course, the implementation of it, whether it's again against forced labor or FITR itself, the existence of that legislation definitely has a deterrence effect. That is a very important aspect of this legislation, so that when there are individuals who perhaps clandestinely may seek to or may look to profit from aligning themselves and supporting authoritarian regimes, whether it's with information and influence operations, whether it's through transnational repression, they will think twice about doing it. Will all of them? Will it terminate all clandestine operations, as Mr. Wark has said? But probably not. That will depend on the proper implementation of it. But the existence of that legislation itself is a strong deterrent.
Merci beaucoup. Une question pour vous maintenant, Monsieur
Thank
Wark.
you very much. A question for you, Mr. Wark. You talked about your concerns that the registry could become a good guy registry. Would there be a risk also that real actors try to sign up, even if they have nefarious purposes, so that they can be under this umbrella of good faith, possibly, and all the while continuing their negative clandestine activities?
Thank you. I'll respond in English to this interesting question. It wouldn't be the smartest approach, in my view, in the world to sign up to the registry if you intended to continue practicing covertly some form of foreign interference. It would put you in the sights of both monetary penalties and potential criminal sanctions, as well as make you an easily identifiable target for either law enforcement or CSIS. So I don't think that's very likely. My concern about it being a registry of good guys, and I take Marcus's point that it will contain many good guys who will sign up, understanding the purposes and transparency objectives. My concern is really the kind of resource implications that this is really going to require, and in trying to measure those resource implications against potential outcomes. And again, and this is something I encourage public safety to think about very seriously from the beginning. The best example of a registry that's been around for quite a long time and has been proven, I think, pretty ineffective in terms of leading to any real outcomes in terms of legal action is the Australian one. I think that Marcus may correct me on this, but I believe there's only been one prosecution that's followed from the Australian scheme, and even that one was somewhat controversial and probably would have been caught by other criminal legislation and by a combination of Australian security services and federal police in that regard. And there's been a lot of complaints and criticisms in the Australian context about, the wastefulness, frankly, of people having to go through a very complex registration process. A former politician, for example, might have to do this. And so I just think this is why, I'm not opposed to the idea of the registry. I think it's very important to continue to try and measure its effectiveness, and that's a role that I think Parliament can play, and the annual reports of the Commissioner will be very important in that regard. But I do fear a bureaucratic sinkhole, to be honest. I do fear the drawing away of resources from other law enforcement and intelligence activities where Canada has, frankly, limited resources. And this is one of the things that was of great interest to me in Dan Rogers' recent public address, where it's talking about the challenges of trying to kind of move very rapidly from one threat to the next and the need to constantly change the resources that CSIS could allocate. So I guess my concluding remark about this is that I think we have to be very careful to keep the Foreign Influence Transparency Registry as targeted and tightly managed and resource unintensive as possible. Thank you.
Sure. We'll give it to you the next time. But I will be very serious on the timing moving forward. So, Mr. Culkin's 5 minutes, and I will cut you off at 5.
Thank you, Chair. Conundrum of having 3 interesting witnesses, but I have to focus my questions on Mr. Tay. Mr. Tay, can you hear me okay? Well, you might want to take your microphone off.
Yeah, I can hear you.
You can hear me okay? Good.
Yep.
Just going to follow up on a line of questioning from Mr. Cooper. So you were contacted by the RCMP and told that it was unsafe for you to continue to campaign. Can you just confirm that?
Yes.
Did they specifically tell you? Was it you specifically, somebody in your family, or somebody in your broader circle of loved ones that was actually most at risk? Was any of that disclosed to you?
I specifically asked that question to the RCMP agents, and they said they are only target to me, myself, and not my family at the time.
Now, you said that your volunteers were harassed and intimidated. Can you give me just a quick example of what that looked like?
During the door knocking, canvassing, there are a man following 2 guys and 1 lady with my team, and they recognized him that he was taking a camera and a hand put in his long overcoat. And then they were kind of scared and reported to me, and then I told them to just go to the police. And then they tried to, maybe door knock another half an hour. That guy disappeared for a while and reappear on the other corner of other streets. So they are actually followed. Yeah, and they report that to the police.
Did anything come of it?
No.
In addition to the things that you've already disclosed, you say there was a disinformation campaign against you on a door-to-door level or on the doorsteps. And my understanding, based on what I've seen in the media and such, is that the message going door to door was conveyed that if you vote for Joe Tay, Beijing's Toronto consulate will know, and there'll be consequences for the people who vote for you. Can you confirm that that was true?
Yeah, that was actually attached to the secretary, which did not have enough time to interpret for the attachment. So that will be provided if you need that piece of information that was actually distributed.
How effective and how broad and how widespread do you think that campaign, that door-to-door campaign, was?
The door-to-door campaign was very effective because it's all seniors, right? So they actually visit, to my knowledge, is at least 3 total seniors buildings in Don Valley North. So I think 70% of the seniors did not go. According to my volunteers, try to contact the building, and they were too afraid to share.
So based on your GOTV, you're able to basically ascertain that a large portion of seniors in your constituency that you were running in did not go out to vote. Is that right?
At least they received that note, was very scared and have queries. And regarding to the actual votings, I have to look into the data itself.
And you think it was because they were threatened and intimidated and would lose their, say, ability to visit mainland China again? Was that the main
Yes.
threat?
Yeah. They believe that was true.
Are you aware of any connection between this intimidation campaign and Beijing's Toronto consulate?
I believe it is. I think they are related.
You do?
I do.
Okay. Did you listen to the testimony of the witnesses in the previous hour?
No, I don't have. I haven't come in yet.
Okay. So the CSIS official who just testified said that, according to the reports that they put out, that no accredited diplomats from the PRC interfered in the 2025 election. Would you agree with that?
No, at least to myself, I know I've been a target and a victim because not just, but simply by the public bounty and that press conference alone, it's solid proof.
Do you fear any consequences for yourself or anybody in your family, etc., for just testifying at this committee today?
Yes, I would, because it will be make known, and I think the continuation of people of influence, they would want to silence them.
For your courage in coming and testifying today and telling us this story. I can't imagine the duress and stress that you must be under. How much time do I have left, Chair?
You are exactly at 5
Okay,
minutes.
thank you.
That was
Thank you,
excellent
Mr.
work,
Tay.
Mr. Calkins. Thank you so much. Madame Kayabaga, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much. I also, through the chair, would like to welcome our witnesses today again. I want to kind of focus some of my questions around the diaspora community, because you did mention a little bit on the diaspora and their role, or if I would say like how they're used as a tool for hostile actors to kind of use that avenue to move an agenda in a particular democracy. I'm just curious to know how foreign government is using, how do you purview or perceive foreign governments using economic leverage, whether it's through business associations, any trade ties, if there are any, indirectly or directly, to influence diaspora political behavior here in Canada? Yes, Mr. Kolga.
Right. Thank you for the question, Chair. Look, these foreign authoritarian regimes use all sorts of levers to try and influence diaspora communities. If we're looking at Russia, Russia does try to influence its diaspora community. It's usually done through state television, promoting radical nationalist views, anti-Ukrainian views inside of it. But it also, I think more importantly, targets Canadians of Ukrainian heritage, Baltic heritage, other Central and Eastern European heritage, Polish heritage, with intimidation threats. I mentioned in my opening remarks that these communities for nearly 80 years have been targeted with smears, suggestions that they are somehow fascist in nature, all of them. And this is not based on any real political beliefs. It's not based on any historical facts. It is based primarily on the heritage of these Canadians, and it's been ongoing, and this has been intensifying again since the Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2020. Of course, we've also seen the same sort of efforts by the Chinese government in terms of trying to silence critics of that regime. I mentioned the Uyghur community, the Tibetan community, Hong Kong community, and I'd like to take this opportunity to also express my support and thanks to Joe Tay for his courage for standing up like this. I've personally been targeted with significant death threats that have been investigated by York Region Police back in 2019, 2020, 2021, coming primarily from radicalized members of the Russian community, Russians that were aligned with the Kremlin. I also get regularly targeted by Russian state media, articles in RT, Sputnik, Komsomolskaya Pravda, etc. So I know I have a small sense of understanding of what Mr. Tay is going through. And this is something that the Canadian government needs to take very seriously. This sort of targeting of individuals and communities truly is a threat to our democracy and our ability to clearly and independently make political choices and choices for our society.
Yeah.
So
obviously, you mentioned that you've seen the Russian interference evolving over time. How do you think that they're using social media to create this, misinformation and disinformation to drive even the political agenda that they want to drive here in Canada?
Well, they've become incredibly sophisticated at exploiting social media and all sort of digital technologies that we have today. And let's not forget, Russia's been at this game for over 100 years.
That they have influencers here in Canada that they're using their platforms to propagate
Absolutely.
Massive, okay.
And I was starting to sort of explain some of that earlier through this RT.
Do you have any that you think you could name in just on the record?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's well known through the DOJ indictment that there were 3 Canadians named in that indictment as working with the Russians to set up Tenet Media. Lauren Southern, who's a well-known far-right influencer online. She was one of the influencers or podcasters that was part of the Tenet Media scheme. Lauren Chen was another one, as was Liam Donovan. These are all 3 Canadians that were alleged by the DOJ to have been involved in this scheme. And so the influencers that were involved in this Russia Today funded scheme were basically, some of them were getting up to $100,000 per episode. To try and influence not just American politics, but Canadian politics as well. And as we know...
I'm going to have to interject, given the timing. I do apologize.
It's the second time.
I know we are over time. Given the timing, there are other opportunities. Madame Normandin, 2 minutes, 45 seconds.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kolga, you earlier in some articles stated that it was important for Canada to work with other countries against disinformation, for example, with Japan against Russian disinformation. Now, this is a question for both of you. Now, in terms of interference, specifically threats against persons, should Canada work more closely with other countries, and which ones?
Absolutely. We should be working with those countries that do have, number one, experience in dealing with disinformation, who have successfully dealt with some of these threats. I would look to Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Sweden has set up a psychological defense unit within its government to specifically address foreign influence and information operations targeting Swedes, and to warn Swedes and educate them about how to defend themselves and their democracy against these sorts of threats. There are other European nations that have also succeeded. I think France is doing a fairly good job of this. But in terms of the influencers that I was talking about earlier, we should be working with our allies to expose them whenever they do appear, whether they're Canadians, Americans, Europeans and such. Working together with our European allies to expose those influencers, I think, again, it's a question of transparency and accountability. And it may be easier for our European allies to expose some of those influencers rather than Canada itself. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. And I think there's a real opportunity to work with our allies to address this challenge and the threats.
Could I just add very, very quickly? I think it's important to understand that although Russia, for example, has a very sophisticated capacity to engage in foreign interference and influence operations around the world, not every country is subject to the same degree of Russian activities. So the capacity is there. The question of the extent to which a particular country is targeted will depend. I think one of the surprising, perhaps certainly for me, outcomes of the Hogue Commission inquiry was to indicate that it was the view of the intelligence community, as well as the investigations that the Hogue team put together, that Russian, at least electoral interference operations and operations against democratic processes was not conducted at a very intensive scale. So we may not be on the top tier target list for Russian activities, and that has an implication in terms of where Canada might go to understand Russian foreign interference and learn lessons from allies, but certainly the Five Eyes partnership has to be critical to that.
Okay, thank you so much. Madame Normandin is out of time. We will now turn to Mr. Jackson for 5 minutes. Before we start, I faked out the clerk. If there are items that we haven't covered or I've cut you off, you can submit them to the committee, and it will form part of our study. Mr. Jackson, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the three witnesses. This has been very interesting for me as a new member of Parliament. There was some debate about whether another study by this committee on foreign interference was needed. Certainly the Liberals were pushing back against that when it was proposed, but as a new member of Parliament, I've found this very educational. I think this is very concerning to a lot of Canadians about what's going on in this country right now and around the world. So I appreciate you being here today. To Mr. Tay, I'm just astounded by this situation that you've had to deal with. I really am. It is completely unacceptable on Canadian soil. You've got the PRC putting a bounty on a Canadian citizen's head who's campaigning for elected office. And then you've got the Prime Minister coming out after one of his candidates encourages a set of journalists to promote that bounty publicly and share it more widely. And you've got the Prime Minister coming out and saying that, it's not so bad that his candidate did that. It's a teachable moment. And that the candidate is actually a person of integrity who incited media to promote a story about a communist dictatorship putting a bounty on a Canadian's head who is seeking elected office in this country. I'm not sure what about that screams integrity, but very little of it to my constituents in the southwest corner of Manitoba, I'll tell you that. I'd just like to give you an opportunity to comment on that, because I'm not sure we've really discussed how disturbing those comments from the Prime Minister really are.
I was, thank you for bringing this up, and I was really concerned, and when Paul Chang was first announced that through the press, and it was picked up by the media, then my life was in danger exponentially, especially and during that 3 days or 4 days that when the leader of when Mark Carney was protecting the candidate. That really scares me because it is a totally a different ideology when Canada, the MP, everyone should be sworn to protect Canadians. And when it is a CCP direct threat to our democracy and through the election threat, then when the MPs or the leaders promoting that at the same time, it meant it gives a almost like a approval to the people who wants to really hurt me, to like a green light. So it was really a scary situation for me and my family. And I was about to terminate. There was a thought during my family discussion that I should terminate my running immediately after that. But I kept going because I think at least there will be some protection from the system. But up till now, I was worrying that is there any follow-up on Mr. Paul Chang's action of stating the bounty? Looks like he's retiring without any consequences. I think that really alarms Canadians, should be alarm Canadians.
Well, I thank you for your courage in continuing to seek elected office in this country. I know the Prime Minister, shortly before this all took place, as chair of Brookfield, secured a $270 million loan from the PRC Bank, which is involved with the Communist Party. I wonder if you see any connection between the Prime Minister's unwillingness to speak out against the bounty they placed on your head and the fact that he just borrowed $270 million from them several months before.
Well, I don't have any proof on the relation, but it is a fact that Canada will seek economic development with as when the Prime Minister is now initiating a collaboration, a deeper cooperation with China. That maybe Canada needs it economically, but there is a side note that every Canadian should be made aware, or the members of Parliament that should be made aware there should be countermeasures that to protect Canadians, because as a different ideology country that is collaborate closely with Canada, there should be at least some law protecting or countermeasuring this kind of threats.
I just thank you very much for your courage, Mr. Tay, both in your actions during the election and in appearing before this committee today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lewis, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. Mr. Kolka will try for the third time to finish the line. You mentioned the U.S. Department of Justice alleged that Tenet Media, a company founded by Canadians, accepted nearly $10 million from Russian state-linked sources to amplify Kremlin narratives through far-right influencers. And research also shows that far-right media ecosystems in Canada are also often spreading divisive narratives that align with foreign objectives. So this sort of opens up a different line of conversation. How does this case illustrate the vulnerabilities in Canada's information ecosystem? And in your view, how do these domestic networks amplify foreign disinformation that can actually threaten our democratic cohesion? And what can we do about that if they're actually Canadian companies?
Well, the Tenet Media case is a clear smoking gun that Russia is very much interested in contrast to Madam Hoag's conclusion that Russia is very much interested in manipulating Canada's information space and our democracy as well. But these sorts of operations are not just limited to the far right. They are also happening on the far left. There's a great example. Back in 2022, in August of 2022, there was an article published by a far-left journal based in Canada that basically targeted Ukrainian and other Central and Eastern European Canadians with incitement of hate, hate-based narratives, suggesting that any of them who identified as victims of communism, and I would argue that the vast majority of Central and Eastern Europeans who now live in Canada, their families, came here because they were fleeing Soviet Russian terror and repression and colonization. Because they identify as such, the far left suggested that we are these, because I'm of Estonian heritage as well, that nearly 3 million Canadians of Central and Eastern European heritage are enemies of Canada. That is an incitement of hate. So this is just one example, but these are the sorts of narratives that are moving around on the far left as well. So it's not just a problem of the far right and far left. Russia successfully exploits both sides in order to polarize our society and divide us. That's the key, to sow chaos. That is Russia's primary objective in terms of its influence and information operations targeting the Western democratic world.
Younger generations are turning more to social media for their news than any traditional media. So what role would public education, as people are, digesting more of this information, what role would public education have? What role do different levels of government have? What role do journalists have? How do we find that balance of explaining how to detect misinformation, disinformation?
It's not just youth that's turning to social media. I think all generations are getting most of their information nowadays off of social media. I'm one of the rare Canadians who still pays for a newspaper to come to their door. Okay, there you go. But most Canadians don't do that. I think that we don't value news, facts, journalism the way that we did a few generations ago. Will more public education fix that problem? I'm not sure. That requires a complete shift in culture, not just in Canada, but in much of the Western world. And how we do that, I mean, it's going to take a whole of society approach, a non-partisan approach to dealing with these threats. And that I'm not sure that we're prepared to do that yet. We have our allies in Finland, Sweden, and again Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, who have figured out ways to do this, to bring their nations together, to build that resilience. They're smaller, they're homogeneous, they're not like Canada. And so I think we have a lot of challenges in this country. Some of the things that make us stronger will also make it a bit more of a challenge to do that. But it's, again, government taking leadership, bringing all of society together, whether it's journalists, elected officials, civil society. This is important. Civil society, I include myself in that. We are on the front lines of this battle, along with journalists, as well as academics. Bringing them all together to figure out a solution, that's what it's going to take. And we're not there yet.
In the less than a minute I have, I'm joined by my colleague, Ms. Chagger, from Waterloo Region as well. So, Mr. Wark from the Center for International Governance Innovation in our riding, in our region. Any closing statements that you'd have to say?
Very brief.
Very brief.
I will be very brief, but there is, I think, an important message that we all need to hear as Canadians, and that is that societal resilience in the face of foreign interference and a wide variety of other national security threats is vital, and education is part of the toolkit of ensuring societal resilience. But I also think we must not start from a point of view that there is no societal resilience in Canada. And to do that is, I think, an extreme point that, in fact, is undermining of Canadian democracy itself. So I think we have to have a very balanced approach to this. I think there's lots of societal resilience in Canada to foreign influence and foreign interference, and I take some comfort in that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lewis. Thank you. Just a reminder: Thursday we will begin our study on It'll be our study on the Leaders' Debates Commission mandate and its experiences during the 2025 election. Just a continuation of this study, we did receive a date from the Minister of Public Safety. He will appear the first week when we return on the 29th. Thank our witnesses. This committee has no further business. We are adjourned.